Imagine a time before words, before stories, before a single shared sound. How did humanity first speak? What was that primordial language, the very first whisper of our ancestors? Join us as we unravel the deep mysteries of linguistic evolution and uncover the fascinating theories behind humanity's original tongue.
Welcome to our channel, the place where knowledge meets curiosity. Here, we dive deep into the wonders of history, science, culture, and mysteries that shape our world. Every video is designed to open your mind and spark your imagination. So sit back, relax, and let's begin this incredible journey together. Now we explain the enduring mystery of humanity's first language.
The search for humanity's first language has always resembled an archaeological quest for something that leaves no physical trace. Unlike stone tools, bones, ornaments, or cave art, spoken words vanish the moment they are uttered. They disappear into the air without fossilizing, without imprinting themselves upon the earth, without carving their shape into the archaeological layers that scientists excavate. And yet, language is the very foundation of what makes us human. It is the invisible architecture that shapes our thoughts, binds our societies, and preserves our histories. This paradox, that the most defining human trait is also the least recoverable, has compelled researchers, historians, linguists, and evolutionary scientists to journey back more than 100,000 years in search of echoes that can no longer be heard. To imagine the dawn of the first human language, we must return to a world untouched by writing or civilization, a world where early humans roamed the vast open savannas of Africa, relying on instinct, shared knowledge, and cooperation to survive. These humans looked like us and possessed brains as capable as ours. They were anatomically modern, armed with the cognitive machinery necessary for symbolic thought, but they lived in a world far more perilous, unpredictable, and primal. Communication in such a world could not be an afterthought. It had to be precise, efficient, and adaptable. A misinterpreted gesture during a hunt or a misunderstood call in the presence of a predator could endanger an entire group. This environment did not simply allow language to emerge, it demanded it. As dawn breaks across the prehistoric landscape, we see scattered groups of early humans preparing for the challenges of the day. Their faces carry determination, their movements coordinated, and their awareness attuned to every subtle shift in their surroundings. When one member points toward tracks on the ground or signals a distant herd, he or she is communicating something more complex than instinct. They share information, warn of dangers, negotiate strategies, and pass on knowledge. This flow of information is evidence of an internal linguistic system, perhaps rudimentary, perhaps unrecognizable by today's standards, yet undeniably present. Though we cannot hear it, we can infer its existence through the complexity of their lives. The biological capability for language rests in the human anatomy. The descended larynx, the shape of the vocal tract, the flexibility of the tongue, and the precision of the lips all come together to form the human instrument of speech. But these physical traits existed long before humans developed full language. Many animals possess impressive vocal tools, yet none speak. This reveals a deeper truth. Language arises not from the voice alone, but from the mind. The human brain, with its expansive prefrontal cortex and neural regions dedicated to syntax and comprehension, allowed for complexity beyond mere communication. It allowed for symbolic representation. To name an object is to assign it meaning beyond its immediate presence. This act creates the first spark of abstraction, the birthplace of language.
Anthropologists believe that the earliest stages of linguistic evolution might not have been spoken at all. Gestures could have been the earliest form of structured communication. Even today, humans naturally use gestures when speaking, suggesting an ancient cognitive link. Prehistoric humans may have used expressive hand movements to convey meaning before vocal language matured. These gestures were likely accompanied by sounds, grunts, clicks, rhythmic calls that slowly formed recognizable patterns. Over generations, these patterns acquired consistency. Consistency evolved into structure. Structure evolved into a system. And from this system emerged language. One of the most fascinating documentary lenses focuses on cave art scattered across early human settlements. Though created much later than the first languages, these paintings reflect a cognitive world far richer than simple survival instincts. The ability to draw an animal on a wall indicates the ability to conceptualize, to represent reality symbolically. If humans could paint their world, they could describe it. If they could tell stories through images, they could tell stories through words. These paintings are therefore silent witnesses of a mind capable of language, not the language itself, but the thought processes required for its existence. As researchers attempt to trace the evolution of language, they confront a barrier. Languages change too rapidly to preserve their ancient roots. Even within a few thousand years, languages can transform so dramatically that they become unrecognizable. The English spoken today is drastically different than that of 1,200 years ago. Over tens of thousands of years, the transformation is unfathomable. This is why linguists cannot reconstruct the first human language directly. What they can do, however, is examine fundamental structures shared across all modern languages, patterns so universal that they must be rooted deep in human cognition. These universals include the ability to form grammar, distinguish between nouns and verbs, express past and present, use recursion, and create infinite meanings from finite elements. This universality hints at a common origin. The journey through the first linguistic landscape inevitably brings us to the intriguing idea of a proto-human language, a hypothetical ancestral language spoken tens of thousands of years ago. This language, if it existed, would be the mother of all linguistic families. It would predate Indo-European, Afro-Asiatic, Sino-Tibetan, Niger-Congo, and all others. But unlike these families, proto-human cannot be reconstructed. The evidence is too faint, too eroded by time. Still, some linguists attempt to analyze deep patterns across unrelated languages in search of echoes that may trace back to a shared origin. They study phonemes, root patterns, and structural behaviors. While these attempts are controversial, they demonstrate a profound longing to understand where human language truly began.
But before we can discuss language families and linguistic evolution, we must return to the earliest humans for whom language was not a cultural artifact, but a tool of survival. Picture a group gathered around a fire. Flames dance in their eyes as they share stories. Not stories as we know them, but tales of hunts, of spirits, of fears, and of lessons. Firelight flickers across their faces as one individual mimics the behavior of an animal, and others laugh or nod in recognition. This moment, repeated night after night across generations, allows language to flourish. The fire becomes the classroom of early humanity. The oral tradition becomes the first library. Language also shaped human emotion and identity. The ability to express love, grief, longing, admiration, or betrayal created bonds stronger than mere biology. Emotional articulation strengthened families and communities, providing cohesion and stability. As humans formed larger groups, language allowed for the creation of shared beliefs, myths, and rituals. These collective narratives laid the foundation for what would eventually become culture, religion, and social order. Thus, the birth of language was not only a cognitive milestone, but also a social revolution. To understand how early language sounded, we turn to modern hunter-gatherer societies that preserve unique phonetic features. Some languages today contain clicks and tones that may reflect ancient vocal patterns. The Khoisan languages of southern Africa, for example, use click consonants thought by some researchers to represent some of the oldest phonetic structures in human speech.
This does not mean they are unchanged remnants of the first language, but they offer insight into the range of human vocal expression. The variety across languages suggests that early humans experimented extensively with different sounds, refining and adapting them over millennia. The mystery deepens when we consider other hominin species. Neanderthals, once thought to be incapable of speech, are now believed to have possessed both the anatomical structures and genetic foundations for complex vocalization. If Neanderthals could speak, then the origin of language stretches even farther back into evolutionary history. Perhaps the first language was not a sudden emergence exclusive to Homo sapiens, but the result of a long shared evolutionary journey. If so, our ancient cousins may have contributed threads to the tapestry of linguistic development. This idea challenges the belief that language is a unique human invention. Instead, it situates language as part of a broader evolutionary continuum.
Many theories attempt to explain how language emerged. Some propose that it began as a system for coordinating hunts. Others suggest it developed from maternal communication, soothing infants, teaching skills, and maintaining social bonds. Still others argue that music came before language, that early humans sang before they spoke. These melodic calls might have carried emotional nuance long before structured grammar existed. Whether spoken, sung, or gestured, early language did not simply convey information, it conveyed meaning, emotion, and identity. The significance of language in human evolution becomes clearer when we compare it to communication in other species. Dolphins communicate across oceans, birds produce complex songs, bees perform dances to signal direction and distance. Yet none of these systems possess the generative capacity of human language, the ability to express an infinite range of ideas, to ask questions, to tell stories, to imagine things that do not exist. This generative property is the hallmark of human cognition, suggesting that language and thought co-evolved. To think abstractly is to speak internally. To speak is to think out loud. By the time early humans began migrating out of Africa, around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, their language, or languages, must have already reached a level of sophistication sufficient for survival in unfamiliar environments. Each migrating group carried its linguistic traditions with it, and over generations, these traditions diverged, mutated, and evolved into new forms. As populations spread across continents, the linguistic branches multiplied. This branching explains the massive diversity of languages that exist today. Each language is not merely a collection of words, but a fossil of human migration, a living record of ancestral journeys. Despite this diversity, every language on Earth fulfills the same fundamental purpose: to translate human thought into sound. The structure may differ, the vocabulary may vary, and the grammar may appear vastly different, but the core function remains universal. This universality serves as a clue to the cognitive foundations of language. It suggests that the first language, whatever it was, laid the blueprint for all linguistic systems to come. The ability to use symbols, structure thoughts, and express ideas became a biological inheritance passed down through countless generations.
The story of humanity's first language does not end with its mysterious birth. In many ways, it begins again with a second great chapter, one of expansion, divergence, and transformation. If part one is about the spark that ignited linguistic consciousness, then part two is about the wildfire that spread across continents, climates, and cultures. As early humans journeyed across the vast landscapes of Africa, Asia, Europe, and eventually the distant worlds of Australia and the Americas, their language, or languages, did not travel unchanged. Instead, with every migration, every new environment, every separation of a group from its parent community, language began to shift, evolve, and branch. This branching would eventually create the immense linguistic diversity we see today, where more than 7,000 languages reflect thousands of years of evolution, adaptation, and identity.
To understand how this divergence began, we must first imagine the moment when the original linguistic community separated. Whether the first language was shared by a single group or several interacting populations, what matters is that once humans began moving out of Africa around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, they carried their communication systems with them. These systems traveled through deserts, rainforests, savannas, mountain ranges, and coastlines. Each new setting shaped the language just as surely as climate shaped the human body. The isolation of groups, the challenges of survival, and the development of unique cultural practices all contributed to linguistic change. Language became a living artifact of human migration, changing not in stone, but in sound. Picture a small band of early humans moving along a coastline, seeking new food sources or following herds. As days become months and months become generations, the original community gradually becomes a new people, shaped by a new environment. Their children learn language from elders, but not perfectly. Each generation introduces subtle changes, slightly different pronunciations, newly invented words, and new grammatical tendencies. These small shifts accumulate. Over centuries, they become defining features. Eventually, the language spoken by this migrating group becomes distinct enough that it is no longer mutually intelligible with the language of those who remained behind. Without any conscious effort, without any written record, a new language is born. This natural divergence is one of the most powerful forces in human history. Linguistic splitting did not occur once or twice, it happened thousands of times, creating a branching tree of languages. But unlike a tree rooted in the ground, this linguistic tree has no trunk that we can observe today. The trunk, the first language, has vanished, leaving only the branches. Yet through these branches, we can infer the depth and complexity of the linguistic past.
As humans moved northward into Eurasia, they encountered climates vastly different from tropical Africa. Cold winters demanded new survival strategies, new tools, new shelters, and new ways of coordinating group activities. These challenges likely expanded vocabulary and linguistic complexity. Words for snow, ice, shelter, animal behavior, and seasonal rhythms became essential. Different groups developed distinct terminologies influenced by their environment. Over time, these differences became embedded in their language's identities, forming the early seeds of what would later become major linguistic families. Meanwhile, groups that remained in Africa experienced their own linguistic evolution. Africa is home to the greatest genetic diversity on Earth, and likewise, it is home to extraordinary linguistic diversity. This suggests that Africa has had the longest period for languages to develop, diversify, and evolve. The click languages of Southern Africa, the tonal languages of West Africa, the Cushitic languages of the Horn, and the Afro-Asiatic family stretching northward into the Middle East, all are descendants of ancient linguistic branches shaped by thousands of years of separation and cultural transformation. While Africa nurtured profound linguistic breadth, the spread of humans across Eurasia began to produce families of languages that would eventually influence global history. But at this early stage, tens of thousands of years before writing, we cannot identify these families directly. Instead, we rely on the principles of comparative linguistics, observing patterns of grammar, phonology, and morphology that hint at shared ancestry. For example, many languages across the world follow a subject-object-verb structure. Others place adjectives after nouns. These similarities are not coincidences. They emerge from cognitive preferences, migrations, and early interactions among communities. As the documentary camera travels across prehistoric Eurasia, we encounter landscapes that demanded innovative communication. The open grasslands of Central Asia required coordination in hunting large game.
The dense forests of Southeast Asia may have inspired more tonal or rhythmic languages adapted to echoing environments. The icy tundra of the north required cooperative strategies, binding small communities closely together. In each case, language acted as an evolving tool shaped by necessity. It is here that we begin to understand an essential truth. Environment influences language. The rhythm, vocabulary, and even phonetic style of a language can reflect the ecological world in which it developed. Consider the early peoples who crossed into Siberia and later into the Americas. These migrations spanned thousands of miles and countless generations. As groups split further and further apart, their languages evolved rapidly. By the time humans reached the Bering Land Bridge and eventually the vast landscapes of North and South America, their linguistic traditions had diverged dramatically from their distant ancestors. This long journey explains the enormous linguistic variety among indigenous American groups. The languages of the Pacific Northwest, with their complex consonantal structures, differ radically from the polysynthetic languages of the Arctic and the rhythmic languages of the Amazon. Each linguistic system reflects an ancient history of adaptation, migration, and cultural creation.
But language does not only diverge, it also converges. When groups interact, trade, intermarry, or share cultural practices, they influence each other's languages. Over the millennia, such interactions created hybrid linguistic systems. Words were borrowed, sounds were modified, and grammatical rules were reshaped. This process, known as language contact, contributed significantly to the linguistic landscape of early humanity. It reminds us that language is not static. It is a living organism shaped by human relationships. While these migrations and interactions unfolded, a crucial phenomenon occurred: the development of linguistic identity. As groups separated, their languages became markers of belonging. To speak a language was not merely to communicate, it was to belong to a community. This deep connection between language and identity became one of the driving forces behind cultural differentiation. Myths, rituals, stories, and spiritual beliefs began to crystallize within each linguistic group. Language became the carrier of collective memory, passing down knowledge from ancestors to descendants. It was through language that early humans explained the world, taught their children, honored their dead, and preserved their history. The divergence of languages also influenced social structures. In some groups, language may have become stratified, with certain linguistic forms reserved for elders, ritual leaders, or storytellers. In others, language may have been egalitarian, reflecting the communal lifestyle of hunter-gatherer societies. These differences created distinct cultural systems, adding further layers to the linguistic complexity of early humanity. As the documentary lens turns toward the early settlements along rivers and fertile valleys, we see another major shift: the transition from nomadic life to settled communities. This transition, occurring between 10,000 and 12,000 years ago in various parts of the world, profoundly changed the trajectory of language. Agriculture brought stability, population growth, and social hierarchy. With larger villages and emerging leadership roles came the need for more formal systems of communication. Words for planting, harvesting, seasons, tools, and property became essential. The complexity of language grew alongside the complexity of human society. This period marks the beginning of proto-writing systems. Though still far removed from full writing, humans began using symbols, marks on bones, carved patterns, and mnemonic devices to record information. These symbolic systems were not languages, but they reflected a growing need to preserve meaning beyond memory. They are the ancestors of writing, and their existence demonstrates how language and cognition were rapidly evolving.
One of the most profound consequences of linguistic divergence was the birth of mythology. Different groups developed their own creation stories, spiritual beliefs, and explanations of natural phenomena. These mythologies were preserved orally for countless generations and played a central role in shaping each group's worldview. Through these stories, we glimpse how early humans understood their origins, their purpose, and their relationship with the natural world. Language allowed myth to flourish, and myth, in turn, enriched language. As the documentary shifts to the early human expansions across oceans, we encounter another layer of linguistic complexity. The first seafaring populations carried their languages onto islands across the Pacific, Indian Ocean, and Mediterranean. These early navigators brought with them not only tools and traditions, but also the linguistic foundations that would evolve into rich oceanic language families. The Austronesian expansion, one of the most remarkable migrations in human history, resulted in languages spoken from Madagascar to Polynesia. Each island, separated by vast oceans, became a linguistic laboratory where grammar and vocabulary evolved independently. The isolation of these communities accelerated linguistic change, creating languages as distinct as the islands themselves. Meanwhile, linguistic communities in mainland regions were shaped by dramatic environmental changes. The end of the last ice age brought rising sea levels, shifting ecosystems, and new migration patterns. As environments changed, languages reflected these changes. Words related to hunting may have declined in importance, replaced by vocabulary associated with agriculture, trade, or craftsmanship. These transitions demonstrate how human societies and languages evolved together. By the time writing emerged around 5,000 years ago, the linguistic diversity of the world was already immense. Writing did not create languages, it merely captured them. The earliest scripts, from Sumerian cuneiform to Egyptian hieroglyphics, represent only a tiny fraction of the linguistic landscape that existed at the time. Most languages remained unwritten, passed through memory and tradition. Yet writing profoundly affected those societies that adopted it. It brought permanence to speech, transforming language into a tool of administration, record-keeping, and cultural preservation. But this shift belongs to a later chapter in humanity's linguistic story.
The deeper humanity ventures into the study of its origins, the more we seem to understand that language is not merely a tool, but a mirror of our earliest consciousness. Part 3 of this exploration turns its focus toward ancient civilizations, long-buried scripts, and the linguistic footprints of cultures that predate written memory. If the first language emerged tens of thousands of years before humans ever carved symbols into clay or arranged ink on parchment, then the early civilizations inherited linguistic legacies that were already ancient. What they left behind were shadows, echoes, and fragments, clues that continued to animate the passions of linguists, archaeologists, and anthropologists who attempt to reconstruct the vanished voices of prehistory. In this part of the documentary, we walk across the ruins of the world's oldest cities, examine the rise of writing systems, and search for commonalities that might lead us closer to humanity's first spoken tongue. When scholars look at the Sumerians, widely considered the creators of the earliest known writing system, they find a culture already filled with myths, institutions, and refined linguistic structures. This means the Sumerian language did not arise suddenly, instead it descended from older, unrecorded stages that had evolved over millennia. The cuneiform writing system that emerged around 3400 BCE was not a representation of a new language, but of one that had matured long before its first symbols were pressed into wet clay. To understand how language may have sounded before history began, researchers compare the features of Sumerian with other early languages, searching for the remnants of prehistoric speech. Sumerian is an isolate, a language with no proven relatives. This isolation fascinates scholars because it suggests either a lineage so ancient that all its relatives have vanished, or one that split off from the earliest linguistic branches before families like Indo-European, Afro-Asiatic, or Sino-Tibetan ever formed. Some researchers argue that a language as structurally unique as Sumerian may preserve traces of a proto-human linguistic layer, yet this remains speculation, haunting and beautiful nevertheless. The same mystery surrounds the ancient Egyptian language, the world of hieroglyphs, and the cultural memory encoded in a civilization that stood for more than 3,000 years. Unlike Sumerian, Egyptian belongs to a large and well-studied family, Afroasiatic. Yet even here, the earliest stages of the language appear abruptly in the archaeological record, rich with grammar and vocabulary. The first hieroglyphs, dating to around 3300 BCE, already portray a fully developed writing system. Scholars believe that spoken Egyptian must have existed long before writing began, but how far back its linguistic ancestry reaches is still unknown. If Afroasiatic languages share a common ancestor, could that ancestor be a cousin or descendant of the world's first language? Some linguists propose that Afroasiatic may be one of the oldest surviving language families, potentially originating over 10,000 years ago in Northeast Africa. If so, the proto-language that preceded it may offer valuable hints about the deep linguistic past, though reconstruction becomes increasingly uncertain as one moves beyond a few thousand years. The earliest human language, if it ever left traces here, would be dissolved by time, like ink washed away by centuries of floodwater.
Moving eastward, the Indus Valley civilization introduces a linguistic riddle of its own. Unlike Sumer and Egypt, the Indus script remains undeciphered, its symbols cryptic and silent. Without knowing the underlying language, scholars cannot connect it confidently to any known linguistic family. Some theories suggest a Dravidian origin, others propose a lost branch entirely separate from anything we know. The dozens of seals, tablets, and inscriptions unearthed from Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro whisper across 4,000 years, but their message is locked behind a wall of symbols that defy interpretation. This very mystery fuels the possibility that behind such early civilizations lie linguistic worlds unlike any modern system, perhaps closer to the speech of the early human migrations that shaped Asia. If the Indus script represents a family older than known Dravidian or Indolarian languages, then its roots may extend toward a prehistoric era where linguistic boundaries were less defined and more fluid. The Indus Valley thus stands as a reminder that missing chapters in linguistic history may still lie buried beneath deserts or riverbeds. Ancient China offers another vital chapter in the study of early language. The Shang dynasty's oracle bone inscriptions from around 1200 BCE represent one of the oldest continuous linguistic traditions on Earth. Yet even Chinese, with its deep historical continuity, emerges already mature in its earliest records. The signs carved onto animal bones and turtle shells show a system of writing that had evolved beyond primitive pictographs, indicating still earlier stages lost to time. Linguists attempting to reconstruct Proto-Sino-Tibetan believe it may have split from a common ancestor as far back as 4,000 to 6,000 years ago, though earlier stages remain speculative. Beyond this point, patterns grow faint and uncertain, like footprints on soft earth slowly fading under centuries of wind. The Chinese linguistic tradition reveals a remarkable continuity, but it also demonstrates how easily deep linguistic origins can disappear. Even a culture with one of the longest continuous histories cannot offer a fully intact record of its earliest language roots. Like all civilizations, China inherited sounds, structures, and expressions shaped thousands of years before its first inscriptions. A parallel linguistic evolution occurred in the ancient Americas, where civilizations such as the Olmec, Maya, and later the Zapotec and Aztec developed rich linguistic traditions independent of those in the Old World. The Maya script, one of the only fully developed writing systems in pre-Columbian America, captures a complex set of phonetic and logographic elements documenting a language that itself had deep roots. Proto-Mayan has been reconstructed to around 2000 BCE, yet its ancestry stretches back much further, into a time when the ancestors of the Maya migrated from northern regions of the Americas.
Their linguistic evolution unfolded in isolation from Afro-Asiatic, Indo-European, or Sino-Tibetan families, proving that the human capacity for complex language did not depend on contact with older civilizations. Instead, it arose naturally wherever human communities grew large, settled, and organized. The independent development of writing in Mesoamerica strengthens the idea that humans carried a sophisticated capacity for symbolic thought long before agriculture or urbanization. If this cognitive capability spread through early human ancestors, it suggests that a common linguistic framework, whether a single first language or multiple early branches, may have been present during the migrations that populated the Americas. The story of ancient languages would be incomplete without examining the Indo-European family, which today includes hundreds of languages and is spoken by billions. From Sanskrit to Greek, from Latin to Bengali, and from Old Persian to Old Norse, Indo-European languages have shaped vast cultural and intellectual traditions across Eurasia. But as extensive as this family is, its origins remain contested. Scholars reconstruct Proto-Indo-European to around 4500–2500 BCE, but what came before remains unknown. The proto-language itself, reconstructed through comparative linguistic methods, was already sophisticated, indicating earlier stages long lost. Competing theories debate whether Indo-European emerged on the Pontic-Caspian steppe or in Anatolia, but both scenarios assume a much deeper linguistic past preceding the formation of the family. If humanity's first language existed tens of thousands of years earlier, then Proto-Indo-European cannot be its ancestor, but one of its many great-grandchildren. Yet some researchers argue that the similarities between distant language families, Indo-European, Uralic, Altaic, and even Afro-Asiatic, may reflect traces of a deeper common origin. Attempts to reconstruct such a macro family, often referred to as Nostratic or Euroasiatic, remain controversial but intriguing. The possibility that Indo-European languages contain faint echoes of a first human language is tantalizing, even if evidence remains elusive. As we turn our attention to Africa, the cradle of humanity, we encounter linguistic diversity unparalleled anywhere else on Earth. Africa contains more than 2,000 languages grouped into several major families, including Niger-Congo, Nilo-Saharan, Afro-Asiatic, and Khoisan. This extraordinary linguistic variety suggests immense time depth, reflecting hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution on the continent. If humanity originated in Africa, then the earliest languages must also have first taken shape there. Some linguists believe the Khoisan languages, with their distinctive click consonants, represent some of the oldest surviving linguistic features, but others argue that their unique sound systems evolved later, challenging the idea that they preserve ancient speech. Still, the very existence of such diversity supports the idea that African languages have had more time to evolve, diversify, and diverge from ancient roots. This diversity also challenges the notion of a single first language. It is possible that early humans across Africa developed different forms of speech in parallel, shaped by geographic isolation and cultural variation. Yet if a single proto-language preceded them, its traces may be buried within the structural similarities that researchers occasionally detect across African families despite vast differences.
Archaeological discoveries further suggest that language played a central role in the formation of ancient cultures long before writing emerged. The symbolic artifacts of Blombos Cave in South Africa, dating to around 75,000 years ago, demonstrate a level of cognitive sophistication consistent with the capacity for fully developed speech. The geometric engravings, beads, and tools found there imply communication, planning, and shared meaning, all of which depend heavily on language. Similar findings at sites across Africa, the Middle East, and Eurasia reveal shared artistic traditions, suggesting that symbolic expression, and by extension, linguistic complexity, was widespread among early human populations. These discoveries challenge older theories that language emerged suddenly or only among certain groups. Instead, they paint a picture of a gradual yet steady evolution of symbolic thought that coursed through the bloodstream of early humanity. If the symbolic capacity was universal, then perhaps language, in some early form, was also universal. That language may not resemble any known tongue,
but its legacy would still flow through every modern human language, shaping the structure and rhythm of speech long after its words vanished. As civilizations began forming their own identities, their languages became markers of political power, social hierarchy, and cultural transmission. The written word, in turn, transformed language from an ephemeral human expression into something that could endure across centuries. Yet writing arrived late in the human timeline. For at least 90% of humanity's existence, language was exclusively oral. This means that the first language and countless subsequent early languages were never recorded. They lived, breathed, evolved, and disappeared entirely through speech. The earliest writing systems, cuneiform, hieroglyphs, Indus signs, oracle bones, and Mesoamerican glyphs, capture only the final stages of linguistic evolution that had unfolded over millennia. These scripts are the surface ripples of a vast ocean of prehistory lying beneath, and within that ocean may lie the remnants of the first human language. Even within recorded history, languages have a tendency to evolve and disappear rapidly. Latin transformed into the Romance languages within a few centuries. Sanskrit fractured into multiple Indo-Aryan languages. Ancient Egyptian evolved into Coptic and then became extinct as a spoken language. Sumerian continued as a liturgical language long after it had ceased to be spoken in everyday life. These transformations demonstrate how dynamic languages are and how quickly their earliest forms can vanish. If such change occurs within centuries, imagine the transformations that occurred across tens of thousands of years before writing. The earliest languages would be unrecognizable today, even in reconstructed form. Their words, grammar, and intonation would differ so drastically that modern listeners might not identify them as related to their own language family. Yet the essence of human communication, the impulse to share meaning, express emotion, and forge connection, remains the common thread linking all these ancient voices.
Another vital path of inquiry lies in comparing myths, cosmologies, and oral traditions across ancient civilizations. Despite geographic separation, many cultures share strikingly similar narratives. Flood myths, creation stories involving primordial chaos, tales of the sky and earth once united and later separated, or stories of divine beings teaching humans how to speak or write. While some may view these similarities as evidence of cultural diffusion, others suggest they reflect shared cognitive frameworks inherited from early human ancestors. Such parallels may not directly reveal linguistic roots, but they offer insight into the thought patterns of early civilizations. If similar stories persisted long after communities diverged, then perhaps certain linguistic structures or conceptual frameworks also survived the migrations that carried humanity across continents. The echoes of ancient myth may therefore be faint reflections of a deeper linguistic past. From the ruins of Mesopotamia to the pyramids of Egypt, from the steppes of Eurasia to the jungles of Mesoamerica, humanity's earliest civilizations reveal a profound linguistic richness that points toward a much older origin. The diversity of ancient languages suggests a long evolutionary process rather than a sudden emergence. Yet certain patterns, shared structures, recurring sounds, similar symbolic systems, hint that all languages may ultimately descend from a common cognitive foundation. The question remains, did that foundation begin as a single first language spoken by an early group of humans somewhere in Africa, or did language emerge organically among multiple early populations who responded similarly to the pressures of survival and culture? The answer remains elusive, lost beneath layers of time, migration, and cultural evolution. But every ancient script deciphered, every linguistic family reconstructed, and every archaeological discovery brings humanity one step closer to understanding its oldest voice. The ancient world, despite its silence, continues to speak in symbols, ruins, and the linguistic fragments preserved in the languages we speak today. These echoes guide us gradually toward the origins of speech itself. What awaits us beyond these ancient clues is the focus of the next chapter, where science, genetics, and cognitive evolution converge to reveal how the human brain became wired for language and what this may tell us about the first words ever spoken.
To understand humanity's first language, one must journey deeper than archaeology, older than the first civilizations, and further back than the earliest migrations. We must enter a realm where no monuments stand, where no scripts were carved, and where the only surviving evidence lives within the body and mind of every living human. Part 4 of this documentary ventures into the origins of speech itself, the evolution of the human brain, the anatomical transformations that made vocal expression possible, and the genetic footprints that reveal how our ancestors developed the capacity for symbolic communication. If earlier chapters trace the echoes of ancient civilizations, this chapter reaches far beyond them, into the dawn of humanity, when a single spark, somewhere in Africa, transformed our species into beings capable of sharing ideas, emotions, memories, and dreams through sound. Language is often described as humanity's greatest invention, but this is not quite accurate. It was never invented in the way a tool or a technology is invented. Instead, it emerged from slow biological evolution, intertwined with cultural innovation. Long before humans could speak, proto-humans communicated through gestures, facial expressions, and vocalizations similar to those of other primates. What changed and why? The key lies in the evolution of the human brain, particularly the expansion of regions involved in planning, memory, auditory processing, and symbolic reasoning. The prefrontal cortex, Broca's area, and Wernicke's area, 3 regions critical for language, underwent dramatic growth across early hominin species. Fossil endocasts, which preserve the interior shape of ancient skulls, reveal that even Neanderthals possessed advanced neural architecture capable of complex communication. Yet, despite the similarities, humans developed a level of linguistic complexity unmatched in the natural world. Something extraordinary happened in our lineage. The brain became a language-making machine, capable of infinite expression. One of the most important pieces of this puzzle came from a modern family in Britain whose members exhibited a rare inherited speech disorder. Their difficulty in articulating words and structuring sentences led researchers to identify a crucial gene, FOXP2, often described as a language gene, though it controls much more than speech alone. When scientists discovered that Neanderthals shared the same version of FOXP2 found in modern humans, it suggested that the capacity for spoken communication arose before the divergence of these 2 species. This genetic link implies that the foundations of language may be at least several 100,000 years old, predating the emergence of Homo sapiens. Yet, while FOXP2 provides a genetic clue, it is not the sole factor. Language depends on a network of genes working together, an intricate symphony of biological functions that enable vocal learning, memory, auditory processing, and motor control. These genetic discoveries confirm what many researchers long suspected. Language did not emerge suddenly, but incrementally, a series of adaptations accumulating over vast stretches of time.
Anatomical evidence adds another layer to this story. The shape of the human vocal tract differs dramatically from that of other primates. Our descended larynx, flexible tongue, and finely controlled breathing allow us to produce a wide range of sounds. The hyoid bone, a small U-shaped structure in the throat, plays a central role in speech production. Fossils of the hyoid bone from early humans, including Neanderthals, show a shape remarkably similar to our own. This suggests that the anatomical capacity for speech existed long before the appearance of modern humans. Early hominins likely produced a variety of articulated sounds, though the complexity of their speech remains unknown. As the vocal tract evolved, certain sounds, vowels, consonants, clicks, became easier to produce, shaping the potential phonetic range of early languages. Over time, these capacities refined themselves through use, social interaction, and cultural transmission. The human ability to generate thousands of distinct sounds, combine them into meaningful units, and string them into sentences differentiates us from all other species. But evolution provided only the tools. The true miracle came when early humans learned to use them in sophisticated, structured ways. One of the enduring mysteries of language evolution is determining whether speech or gesture came first. Some scholars believe early humans communicated primarily through gestures, similar to modern chimpanzees and bonobos, whose gestural systems are more flexible than their vocalizations. According to this hypothesis, early humans gradually shifted from gestures to vocal speech as their vocal apparatus evolved. Others argue that vocalization came first, citing the social and cooperative advantages of speaking while carrying objects or moving through dangerous environments. The debate remains unresolved, but it reveals an essential truth. Language did not appear fully formed. It began as a multimodal system, combining movement, expression, and sound. Early humans lived in small social groups where communication was essential for cooperation, hunting, child-rearing, and the formation of social bonds. These pressures created the fertile environment in which language could develop and flourish. What began as simple signals evolved into complex symbols, which ultimately transformed into structured grammars capable of infinite meaning. The birth of language cannot be separated from the birth of culture. As early humans began to form larger groups, share food, craft tools, and migrate across landscapes, they developed increasingly complex social structures. These structures required more sophisticated forms of communication. Teaching a child how to make a stone tool demands shared understanding. Coordinated hunts require planning and signaling. Rituals, group identity, and myth-making require symbolic thought. Over thousands of generations, these cultural pressures shaped the evolution of language, pushing it toward greater complexity. The earliest language may have been rudimentary, perhaps without grammar or tense, but it provided the foundation for future linguistic elaboration. Children, with their remarkable capacity for learning and creativity, became the natural engines of linguistic evolution. Each generation refined and expanded the structure of language, turning basic vocalizations into expressive systems through cultural transmission. Thus, language evolution was both biological and cultural, a dual inheritance system that grew more sophisticated with every passing generation.
Archaeologists have long searched for material evidence of early symbolic behavior as a proxy for language. The cave paintings of Lascaux in France and Altamira in Spain, dating back around 20,000 years, reveal advanced symbolic expression. But even earlier examples exist. The engraved ochre pieces from Blombos Cave in South Africa, dating back 75,000 years, demonstrate deliberate artistic design. Similarly, beads made from perforated shells found in North Africa and the Levant indicate symbolic ornamentation far older than previously imagined. These artifacts suggest that early humans possessed not only symbolic thought, but also a shared cultural language through which symbols could be understood. Some researchers argue that rituals, burial practices, and body adornment indicate the emergence of a collective symbolic system that must have been accompanied by complex speech. A society capable of producing symbolic artifacts requires shared understanding, and shared understanding requires language. These early artistic expressions stand as silent testimonies to the linguistic minds that created them. Genetic studies of human populations have provided new insights into the spread of language. As humans migrated out of Africa around 60 to 70,000 years ago, they carried their linguistic capacities with them. Whether they carried a single language or multiple evolving dialects remains unknown, but the pattern of human dispersal suggests a gradual diversification rather than a sudden fragmentation. Some linguists propose that phonemic diversity of modern languages offers clues about ancient origins. African languages, for example, exhibit far greater sound diversity, including click consonants, than languages in other parts of the world. This supports the idea that African languages have had more time to evolve and diversify. If phonemic diversity decreases with distance from Africa, as some studies suggest, it may reflect the linguistic consequences of successive founder populations during migration. Early migrating groups likely carried only a small subset of the original phonetic range, leading to reduced sound diversity in later geographic regions. This pattern mirrors genetic diversity, which also declines as one moves farther from Africa.
Together, these correlations strengthen the case that language, like genetics, has a deep African origin. But identifying the birthplace of language does not reveal its original structure. The first human language remains a ghost, unrecorded, unreconstructible, and likely lost forever. Linguists can reconstruct proto-languages only a few thousand years old. Beyond 10,000 years, the signal becomes too faint, too eroded by time to piece together. Some researchers attempt to identify deep linguistic relationships among the world's language families, proposing vast macro-families like Eurasiatic, Nostratic, or even Proto-World. These theories suggest that many languages may descend from a common ancestor spoken tens of thousands of years ago. But critics caution that such reconstructions rely on speculation and chance resemblances. Over long periods, languages undergo dramatic phonetic and grammatical changes. Words shift, merge, disappear, or transform beyond recognition. Even if all human languages descended from a single first language, recovering its vocabulary or grammar may be impossible. What remains are patterns, structural similarities, shared cognitive tendencies, and universal linguistic features that seem to appear across all cultures. These universals provide indirect clues about the nature of the first language.
One of the most intriguing universal features is recursion, the ability to embed one idea within another. This allows humans to create infinitely complex sentences from a finite set of rules. No known animal communication system possesses recursion, making it a defining feature of human language. Some researchers argue that recursion emerged suddenly through a genetic mutation, while others believe it developed gradually as cognitive capacities expanded. Either way, recursion gave humans the ability to express complex thoughts, narrate stories, form hypotheses, and imagine events that had never occurred. This cognitive leap may have been the trigger that transformed early proto-language into true language. Once humans acquired the capacity for infinite expression, their linguistic systems rapidly grew in complexity. The first language, therefore, may not have been a simple system, but one already rich with potential, capable of expressing layers of meaning even in its earliest form. Another universal is the concept of duality of patterning, where meaningless sounds combine to form meaningful units, which then combine to form larger structures. This hierarchical structure lies at the heart of all human languages. Whether spoken in Africa, Asia, Europe, or the Americas, every language builds words and sentences from smaller units. This shared architecture suggests a common underlying cognitive blueprint. If the first language existed, it likely exhibited some basic form of dual structure, even if its vocabulary and grammar differed from any modern tongue. The existence of such universals implies that language is not an arbitrary cultural invention, but an expression of the human mind's deepest architecture. Language is not just something we do, it is something we are. The question of why language evolved remains one of the most debated topics in anthropology. Some theories propose that language evolved to improve social bonding, allowing humans to maintain relationships in increasingly large groups. Others argue that language evolved to improve cooperation during hunting, gathering, and tool-making. Still others claim that language emerged as a sexual selection trait, a way to signal intelligence or creativity to potential mates. While each theory offers valuable insights, none alone explains the full picture. The most likely scenario is that language evolved through multiple pressures acting together. Social, cognitive, environmental, and cultural factors all intertwined to shape the evolution of communication. The first language, therefore, was not merely a functional tool, but a product of many converging forces, each sculpting the human mind in its own way.
One of the biggest questions concerns how early languages might have sounded. Were they tonal, like Chinese or Yoruba? Click-based, like many Khoisan languages? Agglutinative, like Turkish or Quechua? Polysynthetic, like Inuit or Mohawk? Or were they something entirely different, a structure no longer represented among modern languages? Some researchers suggest that early languages may have been more musical, with melody playing a greater role than in modern tongues.
Others argue that early language was more gesture-based, with vocal sounds gradually becoming dominant. Because no recordings exist, these questions remain speculative. Yet studying the diversity of modern languages provides possible hints. The tonal systems of East Asia, the click consonants of Southern Africa, the complex morphology of indigenous American languages, and the vowel harmony systems of Central Eurasia all demonstrate the astonishing range of human linguistic possibilities. If early language was the seed, then the world's linguistic diversity is the tree that grew from it, branching into countless forms shaped by environment, culture, and time. Another path to understanding early language lies in studying how children acquire speech. In every culture, children follow similar developmental stages: babbling, forming basic words, then crafting sentences with increasing sophistication. This predictable progression suggests that human brains are pre-wired for language, waiting only for exposure to activate their innate capacities. The speed with which children acquire grammar, far faster than any adult learner, indicates that the human mind is biologically tuned for linguistic complexity. Some researchers believe that children's creativity in developing new linguistic structures offers insights into how early humans shaped their languages over generations. Just as children spontaneously create structure in unstructured input, early humans may have refined their proto-language by adding rules, forming categories, and inventing new expressions. Observing child language development, therefore, provides a living model of how the first language might have evolved culturally, passed down through generations until it became a full linguistic system. The evolution of language also changed the course of human history irreversibly. Once early humans developed complex speech, they gained the ability to transmit information across generations. Knowledge no longer died with individuals, but became part of a collective memory. Stories, myths, hunting techniques, tool-making instructions, and social norms could all be shared orally. This allowed human societies to accumulate culture far more rapidly than any other species. The first language was therefore the first human technology, a cognitive tool that amplified memory and intelligence across communities. It transformed isolated groups of primates into cooperative networks capable of shaping environments, building cultural identities, and creating shared meaning. Without language, there would be no cities, no civilizations, no religions, no sciences, no humanity as we know it. The emergence of speech was the single most transformative event in human evolution.
As language spread and diversified, it became one of the most dynamic and adaptable systems on Earth. It changed constantly, shaped by migration, environment, innovation, and interaction. Languages split, merged, evolved, or vanished entirely. Each transformation carried faint traces of earlier stages, but with time, those traces eroded. Attempting to recover the first language is like trying to reconstruct the roots of a vast tree after thousands of years of growth and decay. The roots may still exist, but they are buried deep beneath layers of soil, unreachable yet essential. The first language itself may have disappeared, but its influence remains alive in every sentence spoken today. Every modern language, from the simplest to the most complex, carries within it echoes of that ancient voice. What does all of this tell us about the enduring mystery of humanity's first language? It tells us that language did not suddenly appear, but emerged from a long evolutionary journey. It tells us that the biological foundations for speech were laid long before modern humans existed. It tells us that symbols, art, ritual, and culture all played roles in shaping linguistic complexity. It tells us that early humans carried their evolving language with them as they migrated across continents, diversifying into thousands of tongues. And it tells us that the first language, whether a single proto-language or a collection of early dialects,
lives on not in vocabulary or grammar, but in the cognitive architecture shared by all humans. This chapter brings us to the threshold of a profound realization. The first language may be lost to history, but its legacy is written in the structure of the mind itself. What remains now is to explore the final frontier, the modern hunt for that ancient tongue. In the concluding chapter, we turn to the tools of today's science, from computational linguistics to evolutionary genetics, and examine the theories that attempt to reconstruct what humanity's earliest language might have been like. The search continues, driven by the same curiosity that once compelled our ancestors to speak their first words.
The story of humanity's first language ends not with a revelation, but with an open horizon. Every discovery we have made so far, fossils, tools, genes, and ancient symbols, forms only fragments of a vast and unfinished mosaic. Yet these fragments tell us something remarkable. Language is not merely a system of communication. It is the very fabric of human consciousness, the force that binds memories into stories, thoughts into civilizations, and individuals into communities. As we approach the final part of this investigation, we explore how the search for the world's first language shapes our understanding of identity, culture, migration, and the enduring mystery of being human. This is not a search for a single word spoken hundreds of thousands of years ago. It is a search for a connection, one that spans continents, epochs, and the very boundaries of time. In the last chapters of this journey, researchers turn their attention not just to the past, but to the present. They examine the 7,000 languages spoken today and see them as living fossils, carrying within their structures echoes of ancient speech. Some languages are tonal, some rhythmic, some built around elaborate metaphors, some around strict grammatical rules, and some around fluid poetic structures. These differences hold clues, like genetic markers, that point back to ancient linguistic divergence. Yet the deeper linguists dig, the more the diversity overwhelms any attempt to reconstruct a single ancestral form. What was once thought to be merely a puzzle becomes a humbling reminder. Humanity's linguistic creativity far exceeds our ability to trace its origin with certainty. Still, one question remains central. Is it possible that all human languages ultimately descend from a single ancestral tongue? Proponents of the proto-world hypothesis argue that the similarities across global languages are not coincidental. They point to recurring patterns like basic pronouns and fundamental verbs that appear across unrelated language families. But skeptics insist that these patterns emerge naturally in human communication and therefore cannot be taken as evidence of a common linguistic ancestor. The academic debate is fierce, yet beneath the disagreements lies a shared fascination, a desire to understand the moment when sounds became meaning and meaning became culture. Documentary crews following linguistic expeditions capture scenes that look deceptively simple. Researchers listening to tribal elders, recording fading dialects, tracing migration paths through oral traditions. But behind these seemingly ordinary tasks lies something monumental, the attempt to preserve knowledge that has survived for millennia through memory alone. Many of these languages have no written form. Their complex structures, stories, metaphors, and worldviews exist only within the minds of a few dozen speakers. As these speakers age, humanity risks losing entire linguistic universes. For the scientists who dedicate their lives to this field, each lost language is not merely a vanished method of communication, it is the extinction of a worldview, a collapse of an entire cognitive ecosystem shaped over thousands of years.
This urgency fuels one final question. Can understanding the first language help us understand the future of human communication? Technological changes, from writing systems to printing presses, from radio to digital media, have transformed how humans interact. Yet the core mechanisms of language remain the same. Even artificial intelligence, with all its complexities, learns patterns that ultimately stem from human speech. In a sense, modern technologies are the newest branches on an ancient linguistic tree,
whose roots reach back to the dawn of Homo sapiens. The first storytellers, sitting around prehistoric fires, could never have imagined global communication networks, but the impulse that drove them to speak still drives us today. In this continuity, we find an unexpected truth. The mystery of language is not just ancient, it is eternal. As the investigation reaches its conclusion, we encounter the philosophical dimension of the search. Language is not merely a human tool, it is the source of human identity. It shapes how we perceive the world, how we categorize reality, and how we define ourselves. In some languages, time flows horizontally, in others, vertically. Some languages have dozens of words for colors that others treat as a single category. Some encode social hierarchies within grammar itself. These differences do not simply reflect communication styles, they reveal different ways of thinking. If humanity began with a single shared language, then at some point we diverged not just geographically, but cognitively. The first language, whatever it was, represents a shared mental world that united early humans before culture fragmented into thousands of linguistic traditions. But what if the search for the first language is ultimately a search for human unity? Many anthropologists believe that understanding linguistic origins could help bridge cultural divides today. If all human languages, no matter how different, stem from a common root, then all human cultures share a deeper connection than we often acknowledge. This idea resonates powerfully in a world where conflict, misunderstanding, and cultural divisions persist. The quest for the first language becomes not only a scientific pursuit, but also a symbolic journey toward recognizing shared humanity. Filmmakers capturing this final stage of the narrative often choose to shift their lens from laboratories and excavation sites to human faces. Elders reciting ancient stories, children learning endangered languages, communities fighting to preserve their heritage. These moments reveal a truth that scientists sometimes overlook. Language lives not in theories, but in people. It thrives through use, through emotion, through storytelling. The first language may be lost, but every language spoken today contains its spirit, the human drive to connect, express, and belong. As we approach the final minutes of this documentary, we return to Africa, the cradle of humanity. In the vast savannas where our ancestors once roamed, the wind still whispers across the same landscapes that heard the first human voices. The horizon stretches endlessly, just as it did thousands of generations ago. Somewhere in this ancient land, perhaps beneath the shadows of old baobab trees or along the banks of forgotten rivers, the first meaningful sounds were spoken. Sounds that carried intention, emotion, and memory. Those sounds would spark a cognitive revolution, shaping the destiny of our species. Today, we cannot hear those voices, but we live in the world they made possible.
The search for humanity's first language does not end with answers. It ends with questions that drive future exploration. Could new genetic discoveries reveal the biological foundations of early speech? Could undiscovered archaeological sites provide clues about symbolic communication? Could advanced computational models reconstruct ancestral speech patterns with greater accuracy? Or will the mystery forever remain just beyond our reach? Whatever the outcome, one thing is certain: the journey has only begun. The first language of humanity may be lost to time, but its legacy echoes through every word spoken today. Every sentence, every conversation, every poem, every chant, every lullaby carries within it the traces of the first humans who dared to speak. And in that sense, the mystery is not a distant relic, it is alive within us.
Stay curious, stay with us. And that's the end of today's journey. The world is full of stories still untold. So if you love exploring the unknown, make sure to subscribe and stay with us, because the next discovery is just around the corner.
you.